Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to BTM, to the Basketball Time Machine, the podcast with former NBA players about former NBA players. If you want to hear more podcasts like this one, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you always get notified once we upload a new podcast. So let's get going with today's show. So today's guest is a former NBA player. He played for the Washington Bullets, the Seattle Supersonics, and the New Jersey Nets. Jim McIlvaine, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Honestly, when was the last time you played basketball?
2 years ago, I think. And I played briefly in an alumni game in that game, but that's about it.
Okay. Any plans on being a professional basketball coach?
No, I like my hair. I like the color of it, and I don't want to lose it anytime soon. And I'm away from my family enough as it is. I just came off literally a 3-week road trip for my day job. So I admire the job that basketball coaches have at the pro and college levels, but it's not good for family life. If you're gone away from your family a lot, even when you're not traveling, it consumes a lot of your time.
Absolutely, yeah. So you were drafted in 1994 by the Washington Bullets. What do you recall from the draft?
There was a lot of uncertainty. I worked out for quite a few teams, and the Bullets was not one of the teams I worked out for. The Knicks wanted me to come in the day before the draft and work out. They had the last 2 picks in the first round, and my agent told me not to go. And they ended up picking Charlie Ward and Monty Williams. And I had a really good workout with the Portland Trail Blazers. And they said if Aaron McKie was not available, they were going to draft me. And that was pretty early in the first round. And Aaron McKie was available, so they drafted him instead of me. And then there was a chance that Milwaukee could have drafted me. And that was obviously my hometown team. But up until that point, they had a long history of not drafting local guys. Tony Smith, Doc Rivers, Terry Porter. They typically passed on them. And so they invited me to come down to the Bradley Center for the draft, but I didn't go to New York. So my agent had me get, it's interesting the way technology changes. He had me get 2 hotel rooms just west of Milwaukee so we could have 2 phone lines. And so they were adjacent rooms. And obviously that's not necessary now, but that's what we did. And he said, if you do get drafted by the Bucks, you're close enough you can drive in and do a press conference there. But if you don't get drafted by the Bucks, then you're not sitting there, sad because you didn't get drafted by the Bucks and embarrassed or whatever. So, once we got out of the first round, I was on the phone with him pretty much the whole time. And for a guy who knew so much about the league and offered me great guidance throughout my career, it was interesting to hear him say, I have no idea what's going to happen now when we got into the second round. And then I got drafted by the Bullets, and he was really excited. He said, that's a fantastic place for you. They had George Morrison and Kevin Duckworth. So they already had 2 centers with guaranteed contracts. So it didn't seem like they would have space for me, but Kevin Duckworth was at the end of his career and was battling injuries. And even though George Morrison proved to be a very resilient player who played a lot of games in heavy minutes, I think they had reservations that both of those guys would be able to hang on and play significant minutes. So they wanted some insurance, and it worked out in my favor.
All right. So in your rookie season, the Bullets were a pretty young team, actually. Chris Webber, Tom Gugliotta, Cobbicini, Juwan Howard, and yourself. All of you guys were under 25, and the oldest guy on your roster was Scott Skiles, who was 29 at the time. Who was the guy who helped you the most?
He was a coach, so maybe that's not fair, but I feel like Derek Smith helped me a lot. He was like an older brother, and we had the same agent, and so that was another reason my agent really liked Washington, and he worked with me every day and worked with me before the games, worked with me after games if I wanted to work out after games. And he was a tremendous help. And his son, Nolan, actually grew up to be quite a basketball player and won a national championship at Duke and turned out to be a great young man. And we lost Derek way too early on a cruise ship. He had a heart condition. So he was the one by far in Washington who helped me the most. But from a player's perspective, Scott Skiles didn't even realize it, but he helped me quite a bit because he was on track to become an NBA coach in the very near future relative to his playing career. And he looked at me and said, you should just go lock yourself in a weight room this summer like Joe Klein and put on 20 pounds, and then you can play in this league for as long as you want to. And that's kind of what I ended up doing. I went into the weight room and bulked up a little bit. I was playing at around maybe 245 my rookie year, and I don't know if I got up into the 260. I probably got up into the mid 260s in the summer, but wasn't able to hold it during the season. But I put on some pretty good weight, and it was in the right places, and it really helped my game a lot. And I actually ended up thanking Scott a couple of years later when he was coaching the Suns, and he didn't even remember telling me that. But my agent told me to, try to glean as much information from Scott as I could, because my agent held him in pretty high regard as a basketball player, thought he was a pretty savvy guy, and it would be good to, spend as much time with him as I could and as he would allow.
Yeah. So you had one teammate, you actually mentioned him earlier, George Morrison. Chris Webber had a couple of really interesting and funny stories about him. Do you have a funny George Morrison story you want to share with us?
George and I still keep in contact, and I consider him one of my very best friends from my playing days, and he's a great guy. And he's a very funny guy and great to be around. And when I was doing games for Marquette, every time I'd come into Washington for the Georgetown game, I'd try to get together and have dinner with him. And actually, he flew his son to Louisville, and I took his son and one of his son's teammates and my son to five-star camp in Louisville one summer. And I hope to visit George down in Florida in the near future too. He's got a place down there, but he's a great, fun-loving guy. I don't know if anybody could handle what he's had, the hand that he's been dealt with in life. I think he looks at his height as more of a blessing than anybody else, even with all the issues that he's had that came along with it, with his pituitary gland and having to keep that in check. But he's raised two great sons, and his wife Lily is fantastic, and they're just fun people. And I wish I'm sad in a way that they're all the way over in Virginia and we're in Wisconsin, and I wish we could spend more time with them, and I wish our wives could meet, because I think they'd get along fabulously and really enjoy each other's company. And George really was and still is one of my favorite people. He's a great guy.
Oh, wonderful. Just nice to hear that friendships last even after the NBA career.
Yeah, the retired NBA players do a really good job of giving people the opportunity to get together a couple times a year in the summer meeting, and then again during the All-Star weekend. And I wasn't able to do the All-Star weekend for many years because of my commitments with Marquette basketball, but maybe now I'll be able to do that with a little more frequency. And I always enjoy the meetings. They usually have them in nice locales, and it's great to meet guys and hang out with them. And it's in some ways surreal. Bill Walton came up to me and interviewed me at one point in Las Vegas many years ago, and he referred to me as an NBA legend. I just kind of laughed. I'm like, no, Bill. There's thousands of guys like me that played in the NBA that people can look at and say, no, they were a former NBA player. That guy, Bill over there, he's one of the legends. So, but it's, for as long as I'll walk this earth, it'll be a neat thing for me to be involved in that organization and get to hang out with those NBA legends. Because truthfully, a lot of them were hanging on my wall growing up as a kid. And I would never consider myself as a player to be one of their peers, but the fact that we held a job in the same industry for a period of time kind of allows me to hang out with them a little bit. And I really enjoy it, because it turns out a lot of them are very nice guys and very generous with their time. And they have great insight on their lives and what they've gone through and what they continue to do to this day.
Okay, you just mentioned that you were a fan when you were younger, in your early days. Who was your favorite player as a kid?
Because of the Guinness Book of World Records, it was Wilt Chamberlain,
Uh,
because he seemed to have every record there was in the game of basketball when I was a kid growing up. But then as I started watching it on TV and Wilt was pretty much done, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar became my favorite player. And I actually had I don't know if you'd call them a signature pair of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar Adidas, but they were Adidas shoes and they had Kareem's picture on the tongue of the shoe. And that was the first pair of basketball shoes I ever owned. And that was second grade, playing in the Tuesday Optimist League with St. John Nepomuk. And so I was a big fan of Kareem and loved the sky hook, but nobody ever seemed to want me to take it or learn it or develop it, because Kareem could do it, but for everybody else, when you jump off one leg, it was deemed to be less stable and your body wasn't going to be able to handle the impact of somebody pushing you versus a 2-foot jump hook. So and I've had very limited interaction with Kareem over the years, almost none. And and I read his biography as a kid, and he seemed like a very interesting, layered guy who has a lot of varied interests, and maybe none of them would intersect with mine. But he I learned the word conversationalist reading his autobiography, Giant Steps, and I think it'd be neat to have a conversation with him someday, just to pick his brain on the world that he grew up and went through in basketball and beyond.
all right, so back to the Washington Bullets. Do you think your team was the team of the future, having so many talented young guys?
Well, I don't know if it was the team of the future, but we certainly had potential. And it was frustrating for me to see injuries cut so much of that short. And I think Tony Kornheiser, before he got his Pardon the Interruption show with Michael Wilbon, they had a local show in Washington. And I think Tony affectionately referred to what we went through as the curse of the Bullet. No matter which players came in, no matter how good, no matter how much potential, something was going to come along that was going to mess that up. And we had so many guys go down with injuries. It worked out well for me in my second year because I was able to get significant playing time at the end of the season that allowed other teams to really see my potential, and I was offered a big contract as a result. But Tim Legler was a really good friend of mine in Washington, and to see him go down with a knee injury was frustrating. And Scott Skiles, to see him get injured and not be able to finish out, and Robert Pack. I mean, you just go down the list. So many guys on that team. Chris Webber dislocated his shoulder. It was hard because there was so much opportunity there if everybody was healthy. But that's part of the league. Everybody has to be healthy.
So in 1996, you headed to Seattle, a title contender. Gary Payton, Shawn, Kemp, Detlef Schrempf, and the list goes on and on and on. And you became a starter. How was it playing with Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp? What was the dynamic?
It was fantastic. Those guys were so dialed in. The whole team was. It was such a cohesive unit. You want to come in and not just not mess anything up. You want to help them get better. And that was a really daunting task with that team because they were so close to winning an NBA championship the season before, and they didn't make a lot of significant changes. I came in, and Irvin Johnson, Frank Burkowski left, and there was a couple personnel changes like that, but it wasn't anything super significant. And so, I'm sure there was a lot of pressure, but I just tried to focus on being the best teammate I could be, and understanding my role on that team and trying to execute it as best I could. And that was, be a defensive stopper, block shots, help my teammates on defense, help get my teammates open on offense, and, try to help the team win more games and be more successful than they were before.
All right. Actually, that would have been my next question. In 96, you were one of the best shot blockers and rim protectors in the league. And I wanted to ask if that was your role, being the defensive stopper.
Well, that was certainly part of it. And the stat that nobody will ever talk about, because nobody ever keeps track of it, is the charges. And one of the things I always prided myself on as a defender was my ability to take charges, because there weren't a lot of big guys who were willing and who did on a regular basis try to take charges. But I felt it was integral to what I tried to accomplish defensively, to keep the offensive players guessing. Is he going to try to go for a block shot? And if he does, I'm going to really have to try hard to dunk it on him. And if I can sense fast enough that a guy is going to try to carry that kind of momentum to the basket and I can get myself in a position to draw a charge, that's what I'm going to do. And every day of the week and twice on Sunday, I'd rather have a charge than a blocked shot, because the possession is guaranteed to be yours, and the other guy on the other team is guaranteed to have a foul that he didn't have before. And it's a momentum changer in a way that's, I think, more significant than even a block shot that gets thrown out to half court and everybody in the crowd goes, ooh, wow, it's a real difference maker defensively. And I guess it doesn't happen often enough for anybody to really keep track of who draws charges and how many charges they draw. But I think it's one of the strongest, more than a steal, because you get possession plus the guy gets a foul. It's one of the strongest plays to make defensively. And actually one of my assistant coaches in Washington tried to talk me out of it. He said, you're going to destroy your body. You can't do that for 82 games a season. And my low back from taking charges was every color you could imagine, because I was hitting the floor so much. But I felt like, I wasn't going to be called upon to do a lot of things offensively, but I was defensively. And so I had to do everything I felt I could to help my team. And I was so fortunate when I got to Seattle. I had a real visionary trainer in Frank Furtado, who was near the end of his career, probably the oldest trainer in the league, but always looking forward and always trying new technology. And he single-handedly kept that whole team healthy and on the floor, and allowed them to go as deep in the playoffs as they could, especially guys like Gary Payton, who played super heavy minutes and isn't a big guy and got knocked around quite a bit. And Frank, this is pre-Under Armour, Frank said, we're going to sew pockets in the low back of your jersey, and we're going to put pads in there. And it won't be a real thick pad, but it'll make a world of difference when you're hitting the court so much. And that's what he did. And it really, really helped me and saved me a lot of pain, and probably long-term pain from injury, because I did hit the court so much.
All right. Who do you think was the most underrated player on your team?
On any of the teams I was on?
Okay, let's start with the Seattle Supersonics.
All right. Probably Eric Snow, because Gary was so good, and you just can't have Gary Payton on your team and not play him as many minutes as you possibly can. Eric never really got a chance to show what he was capable of doing until he went to Cleveland. But I thought he was a very capable player, very smart guard, and just hadn't gotten the opportunity yet. So probably Eric in Seattle for sure.
I personally think Calbucini was underrated.
Calbert was a really good player. In fact, my first basketball card is a dunk that I had in Orlando, and Shaq was guarding me. But he's not in the picture because Calbert was nice enough to drive baseline and draw Shaq's attention. So Shaq went over to help. Calbert passed me the ball, and I dunked it for my first 2 NBA points, and it was memorialized on a basketball card. So Calbert was a really good player. But there's another guy, trying to remember Chris's last name. And it's terrible that I don't remember all my teammates' first and last names, but he came in, and you have the roster pulled up in front of you?
I can do it right away. One sec.
Yeah. So he came in on a 10-day contract because everybody and their brother was hurt on our team, and he signed on for another 10-day and ended up signing on for the remainder of the season, and then carried over and ended up being a regular contributor for the team for years after that. And he was a guard, but I thought he was a real solid player right out of the gate. What was Chris's last name? Can you find it on there?
Yeah, I'm looking. In 95?
Yeah, look in that season. Then look. It might have been the following season.
Chris Whitney.
Chris Whitney. That's who it is.
Oh, I remember. He was a point guard. I remember him.
Yeah, I liked Chris Whitney a lot. I thought he was a really solid player, and and he hung around the league. And you never know with a 10-day guy, he could show up and be there for 10 days and never see the league again. But Chris found a way to make it work for him and ended up being a really solid player in the league.
All right, good choice then. So the 1980s and 90s were dominated by big men, Hakeem Olajuwon, David Robinson, Patrick Ewing, Shaquille O'Neal. How was it competing against some of the best centers ever?
I loved it. I loved every minute of it. And I get asked about those guys quite a bit. And I would always say I'd play against Shaq every night of the week if I could, because it's not going to make you worse. You'll learn something every time. And as a competitor, you want to play against the very best. And playing against those guys, Scott Skiles, when he came to us from Orlando, he said it was funny to watch other teams, big men, come down with what he called the Shaq Flu right before they were getting ready to play Orlando. Because Shaq wanted to go around and dunk on everybody, and some of these guys wanted no part of that. So they, it was abdominal pull or hamstring or something that was hard to diagnose, but I could miss a game and then come back after we played Orlando, and somebody else had to deal with Shaq. So
I heard Ronnie Cycli had that, the Shaq Flu quite often.
I never got the Shaq Flu. I wanted to play against him every game and enjoyed it and looked forward to it. The guy that concerned me, and not that I developed a flu of some kind to avoid playing him, was AC Earl. And I told AC that years later when we were both at a Retired Players Association meeting. I said, "You were the guy, man." And he couldn't figure out why. I said, "Well, because some night you might have 4 points, and then the very next night you might have 40 points. And I never wanted to be the guy guarding AC when he got 40 points if he was going to go out and have 4 the next night." And so if Shaq scores 40 on you, it's like, yeah, it's a tough break, but Shaq's a really good player, and it's not like it surprises anybody. But if AC Earl scores 40 on you, it's not like nobody in the league's a bad player, but that's not expected of AC Earl on a regular basis. So that would raise more red flags. So that was the guy, and guys like him who could have big games, like Joe Dumars at the end of his career, who everybody thought was all broken down and couldn't do anything, and then he comes out and lights your team up for 30 points. And it's like he was using a walker in the second half, and he still scored 30 on you. But those are the guys that you worry about, that it's not expected. Your focus or your attention is on some of the other more notable players on the team, and then this guy rises up and destroys you. The season with Vin Baker, I wouldn't say any NBA season is easy, but it was amazing the vibe that the team had. Everybody was healthy. There was no drama. Not that there was a ton before, but it was just, we won 60-some games that year, and we were just rolling. And we came out every night, and I don't know that I ever felt as confident with a team as I did with that team that year, that we had a chance to, not just a chance, we had a good chance to beat anybody in the league on any given night. The Bulls, the Lakers, the Jazz, Houston, anybody. The team was that good and that well coached. George Karl did a great job. He had the best assistants in the league on that team, and it was fun. And that's why I wanted to go to Seattle. When you're on a winning team, it's infectious and it's contagious, and it's harder to get hurt when you're on a winning team. When you're on a losing team, and I'm not saying guys with fake injuries or anything, but it just seems to pile on and multiply. And I was on some teams in New Jersey that weren't great, and it's not like I faked, rupturing my calf or tearing my hamstring or my Achilles, but it seems to pile on. When it rains, it pours, and it can be a rainfall of wins, or it can be a hurricane of losses. And it was fun for those 2 years in Seattle, and really enjoyable to be on the positive side of that with a team that was very successful.
So you ended your NBA career in 2001 with the New Jersey Nets. If you could go back in time, what player you wish you would have played against?
Wilt Chamberlain. you know,
Wow.
and maybe Kareem. I would have liked to have played against those guys just to see what it was like. And you know, Wilt was so far ahead of his time in the era that he was playing, and I got to meet a bunch of guys who played against him. But I think physically, you know, he was so far advanced, his body and his conditioning, you know, and Bill Russell is no slouch. I mean, Bill Russell's a really good player, but it just seemed from what I saw that Wilt had a level of athleticism that may be common now, but was much more uncommon then.
So this is actually my last question, and the one where everybody struggles. I want to know your top 5 of all time, plus your 6th man. And it needs to be a point guard, a shooting guard, small forward, power forward, a big, and with the 6th man, you can choose the position.
Okay. So I'm going to write this down as I do it so I don't get it messed up here. I'm going to go Wilt at the 5. 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I have to go with Michael Jordan at the 2, right?
Good choice, yes.
I would go with Magic at the 4. I would go with Oscar Robertson at the 1. And then a 3, I'd probably slip LeBron in there, I think.
Okay, did I understand you right? You're going to put Magic Johnson on the 4?
Yep. Magic can play any of the 5 spots. He's 6'9". He can guard anybody. Then you got another outside shooter, another tremendous ball handler, a floor leader.
Yeah, you would have a starting lineup where 3 guys can bring up the ball.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, you got Oscar, Jordan, LeBron, and Magic. They could all bring the ball up.
4. Yeah, your fast break game would be pretty good.
And then I got to pick out a 6th man, right?
Yes.
I think I'd take Kareem.
All right. So you stick to your childhood idols.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, you're a loyal fan.
Well, I mean, LeBron started in the league after I got done, but what a tremendous player he is.
Jim, before you go, you also have a podcast yourself?
I actually have a podcast called the Marked Men Podcast. It's relatively new. I've only got 30-some done. But I hope to have George on there someday because it's just a wild ride when you sit down and have a conversation with that guy.
Okay, where can people find your podcast?
It's on iTunes and Google Play, you know, the typical places. And it's myself and another Marquette alum, John Scott Lewinsky, who's like an author and adventure writer. And it's not, I mean, we interview some basketball people. Steve Wojciechowski, the head coach of Marquette, we interviewed him. But it's not a typical, it's a men's lifestyle podcast. So like the most recent one, we had on Danny Pudi, who's the famous actor from Community, and but he does a bunch of voiceover work. He's actually a Marquette graduate, and we wanted to have somebody that wasn't a basketball player that was really famous from Marquette on. So he was on there, and then like John did this thing where he went and drove tanks and shot cannons and stuff, and he interviewed that guy, and I interviewed a couple of Baja 1000 champions last week, and some guys like James Clay who races in IMSA GT, and so it's really we had Miss Missouri on there. It kind of goes all over the place.
Okay, great.
And we did it just because, you know, that's our life, and those are people we run into, and they're interesting folks, and I figure, you know, it'd be great for my grandkids to be able to listen to it if I'm dead and gone by the time they get old.
Okay. And you're pretty busy on social media? I heard people can find you on Twitter too?
Yeah, at Jim McIlvaine on Twitter. I'm the real Jim McIlvaine, I think, on Facebook. There's a picture of me next to the Gentleman Jim P-51 Mustang on my public figure page. And there's some topless photos of me in my car at SEMA last week on there if people are interested in looking at those. They're a little disturbing.
Okay, people, you heard it here first. Jim, it was great having you on the show.
Thank you for having me.